to. Um, Before we get started, I just want to let people know that we do have Carrie here today who is captioning this webinar for us. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see an option for closed captions. If you just select the little arrow pointing up and select View Subtitles, you'll be able to turn those captions on for yourself. You're not turning them on for everybody, just for yourself. So feel free to turn those on for any reason. And thank you, Carrie, for being here.
All right, the title of our series that we're launching today, so excited to launch over the rest of 2020 and into 2021, is Designing for Literacy Development in the Hybrid Classroom. This webinar series is going to get us to think of so many things when we think about delivering hybrid instruction. Hopefully we'll be able to face some of the problems that you're facing right now, celebrate some of the celebrations that you have, and really talk about how we can support our learners to be their best learners in the hybrid classroom. This series comes to you as a partnership between the Department of Education for the state of California, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technologies, and the founders of UDL. So just a reminder about using the chat box throughout our session today. Go ahead and click that chat. Make sure you're selecting all panelists and attendees to share your thinking, your reflections, and your goals as we go throughout today. And if you want to if you see a post that's really got you thinking and you want to acknowledge that post, type @ and that person's name to respond directly to that message so we can keep a nice thread of conversation going. So quick introduction, my name is Niel Albero, and I am an implementation specialist, from CAST. I work with teams across the country, learning about and implementing universal design for learning. And right now I am thinking about relationships. I'm working on a blog post entitled, how are you leveraging that relationship? Because as educators, we know it's really important to develop relationships with our learners, but we want to think about in this hybrid environment, how are we leveraging that relationship? How are we using it maybe to help learners set goals, help them self-regulate or support executive function? So a lot of different things I'm thinking about in that writing. And I'm reading Immunity to Change, which is an amazing book by Lisa Laskow-Lahey. And it talks about how hard it is to create change. And I'm just so interested in the change process right now as we move to hybrid teaching and how hard it is for us to change and thinking about the factors that it takes for us to change. So Susan, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am like somebody else here tonight. I'm also reading UDL and Anti-Racism, and I just love, I look forward to just reading it. I'm going to be really sad when it's over because I just love the voice and the information. And writing is nothing professional at the moment, but for years now, I've been trying to pick away at a little bit of a memoir. So I'm working on that in the dark of the night when there's a free moment from time to time. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad all of you are here too.
So you can find a resource document. The resource document will be just that, a resource for you to have all of the links in one place and something that you can access after the session for kind of an independent workspace after that. So I think Jennifer just put that into the slides for us. And as you go throughout that resource document, there are plenty of resources that'll take you through today's session, but also for future sessions. We have a lot of resources from the National Ames Center on accessible educational materials, some free webinars and resources that you can access. So you can have that open today and be looking through that, or if you'd like to just tuck that tab away and just pay attention to the slides today, that's fine too. All right, Susan, you want to launch our scenario to start with?
Sure. So we're going to just pose a scenario that we hope we can explore tonight or this afternoon. It's night where I am today. I'm in New Hampshire. And also throughout all of the webinars that we do, we'll bring some scenarios forward. I'll read through this one and explain it right now, and but we're not going to address it fully. Just let it kind of populate our minds as we think about the content of tonight's webinar, and then we'll be able to hopefully have more to say to this teacher, Mark, by the end of this hour. So Mark said, this is the scenario, when he was at school in the brick and mortar classroom, Mark worked tirelessly to support his middle school history students to write detailed written responses and contribute thoughtfully to class discussions. But since he's been teaching remotely, he's noticed a drastic change in the quality of his class discussions and in student written responses. Also, he reports about 80% of the students are not really doing the reading. What might we say to Mark about hybrid instruction? Right? Mark's had a change in context. He's seeing a big, drastic change in his learner performance. What might we say to him? We're going to explore what we might say to Mark and what we might say to ourselves, right, as we think about this thing that we call teaching and this changed context, this move to hybrid learning. So we'll use that just as a little bit of food for thought. And if you have thoughts right now about what you might say to Mark, feel free to put those into the chat. There'll be many opportunities throughout this afternoon, excuse me, I keep saying tonight, but throughout this afternoon for you to respond in the chat. But we also welcome all of the introverts out there who would just like to think quietly in their own minds and not have to populate the chat. So feel free to read the chat, to do some thinking, to do some posting, whatever works for you. But it is fun to hear other people's ideas. So if you're willing and able and wanting to post, please do. So what might we say to Mark? Anybody have any ideas just to get us started? Or just take a moment to think for yourself. We'll just give you a minute. See a question coming in, so a question to a question. It's lovely graphic organizers. Thinking about supports in the design. Just a reminder that if you send your messages to all panelists and attendees, that everybody will see. Sometimes I think it just defaults to panelists only, and then it's just Niel and I who are seeing those, and our colleagues on the cast back side. Maybe a posted rubric, right? Wendy's saying maybe something so the expectations are clear. What are the success criteria here? Great, great thinking. All right, why don't we keep going, Neil? Just because I know we have a lot to do tonight, but today. This morning.
And what I notice, I love what we're seeing, and I keep seeing the posts coming through, is that we're talking about the design of the hybrid instruction. And so many people are saying, what can we put in the environment? How can we change maybe what's on our digital classroom? How can we use those in our face-to-face meetings? Or maybe if we're using office hours or individual phone calls, how can we think about those pieces, right? We're thinking about design. And that's really impressive that it comes from the chat, and that's what's our focus today. Is not how can we change learners, but how can we change the hybrid instruction design to meet all those learners? And what we see throughout we see so many things from thinking about the accessibility of the experience, thinking about a variety of ways for students to respond. And that's what our series is designed around. Jennifer is going to put a chat in the chat box if you want to take a link in the chat box if you'd like to take a look at the design. But we have a 7-part series that is based upon learner variability. So our design is going to help us to think about how do literacy learners differ. And these 7 sessions will help us to plan and look at different components of that hybrid design. So we want you to bring your curricula content. So whatever you have, whatever materials you're using to build your literacy learners that you're using in your instruction, bring those with you. And we're going to spend our time focused on different components of design in each of the sessions.
I'll just jump in and add that if you're thinking, I'm a math teacher, I'm a history teacher, I heard Neil say literacy learning, literacy instruction. We're talking about literacy across the curriculum. So literacy in the physical education classroom, literacy in the art class, in math, in science, in English class, everywhere and anywhere that learning is happening, there's often language. And so how is it that we think about that in a hybrid setting?
So our first session today, entitled Becoming Expert Readers and Writers. Oftentimes when we share this word expert readers and writers, it conjures up one thing or one idea. And we want to explore that today. We want to build an understanding together about what expert readers and writers say and do as they're reading, so that we can design for that. If we know what we're trying to achieve, then we can put those steps in place to design. All right, so today's goals. Always important to start with the goals. Our nervous system is so goal directed. So if you know what we're after and what we're going to be talking about throughout this webinar, you can then be planful about what you want to learn. So first, we want to gain a working understanding of the term learner variability, a term that just means simply how are all learners different and how it impacts literacy learning. We want to understand expert learning as a goal for all literacy learners in all contexts. As Susan said, this is not just about one ELA classroom, one writing assignment. It's about how we use literacy across the spectrum. And then we want to plan for supporting that expert literacy learning in learners in your learners, in whatever context that comes in. We want to plan to support that. You want to leave with some concrete action steps that you want to get started with. So with that said, with today's goals in mind, what are your goals? What are you here for? You signed up for this webinar on a Monday in December. What did you come for?
We invite you to, again, just reflect so that your brain is goal directed for your goals or to share in the chat.
And Susan, just to model public editing, which we can do with our learners. I think we changed that. I'm gonna pause here. I think we changed that slide a few times. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that public learning here. All right, so how are those goals coming through? Better supporting teachers, excellent. Thank you so much. Supporting learners to become better proficient readers and writers, awesome. Ideas, tools, and strategies, great. And someone's directing this at UDL, that's great. I want to learn more about UDL and I'll use this literacy frame to help me to think more about that learning.
We've designed this webinar series to be fueled and informed by UDL, but you do not need to know UDL to participate in this webinar series, nor are we promising that you'll know about UDL by participating in this webinar series. Your brain will be primed to learn about UDL if you want to, but we're going to be talking about literacy learning, expert learning, becoming really good at learning itself and applying that to literacy in all contexts. So you can bring in the UDL or you can take the UDL with you or bring it with you at the end and go find it and we can give you some resources, or you can leave that aside and just focus on this central piece for this webinar series.
All right, Susan, before we jump in any further, we want to make sure that everyone is creating a learning environment for them that really works. We put a bunch of things in the chat. We jumped in and it started our learning, but we want to give you a chance to self-regulate in your learning environment. So first, we want you to self-regulate. How can your space better support your engagement? So if you look around your space, you said, man, I should have grabbed that cup of coffee or tea. I should have thought about having a fidget, or maybe this chair is not really working for me. We want to give you a second to do that. Second, we want you to be able to perceive. What's the best way for you to take in this content? Now that you know that there's slides, there is a resource document, you might want to adjust your screen. Maybe think about what tabs you want to have open or how else you might want to think about taking in the content. And finally, how might you want to act throughout this? Is the chat working for you? Do you want to, we have a bunch of journalers here. Do you want to go grab that journal and think about what you might jot down throughout our learning today in your journal and take times for reflection? So we want you to take 2 minutes right now to set up your learning environment to say, okay, I'm ready to dive into the meat of the content. How might I get more ready? So we'll take 2. And then we'll look in the chat and see how might you have changed your learning environment to be ready for today.
Just to reiterate, the instructions right now are just to take care of yourself. Make sure you have what you need for learning for this next hour. And we're going to start again in 1 minute and 38 seconds. If you want to share what you're changing, right? Someone just said, Stacy says, I needed to get water. I got water too, somebody else said. Sometimes we just kind of plop ourselves in front of the computer. We're just there in the nick of time, that extra minute. And that relationship between emotion and learning is so important for our learners, and it's important for ourselves too. Yes, we will be sharing the slideshow. It will be linked in that resource document.
Excellent. So we're seeing so many great strategies, grabbing water, and someone actually cleared coworkers out of their areas to minimize threats and distractions. So awesome. Kudos to you, Devin, for working on that. Excellent. Let's dive in. A little bit more to the meat of the content. So the first thing, a few concepts we really want to get out, especially at the design of this series. We know that some of you may be only able to join us for today. Hopefully what we have to share and think about is much bigger than today. It's going to take us through this series. So one of the initial concepts we want to make sure that we bring to light, we want to spend some time thinking about and reflecting on, is this term learner variability. And again, it's the differences that every learner has in any learning environment. So here's a list, and this list is going to help us to prompt us to think about how learners vary in our context. Now, we know the way that it impacts our literacy learning is going to change between learner and between our hybrid environment and our face-to-face environment. So take a minute to think to read over this list as I read it through, help to clarify language as we go through, put them into some sentences so that you understand what they mean. But think about, how is this impacting your learners right now in whatever environment that you're in, whether you are in person and socially distanced, whether you are fully remote or in some kind of hybrid situation. So how do learners...
If I can interrupt you and say, I'm an old special ed teacher. So when you said learner variability, I was thinking, wait, like you're going to say kids with disabilities, kids with attention deficit, kids, but you're not saying that, are you? You're talking about the ways that regardless of labels and thick student files, you're talking about the ways that all learners, the way that we are different, all human beings are different as learners. So I think that's really important to highlight here, that we really are changing that lens on how we see, yeah, all kids are different. I've got 7 kids who are blank. All people are different, and that variability is human.
So that we have variability in our interest in the learning goal and what we're learning in that content area, in our effort and ability to sustain that effort and be resilient throughout learning, in our emotional well-being in the learning environment, our ability to perceive content and understand new language, the background knowledge that we bring to learning, our ability to physically navigate the learning materials and resources, our ability to communicate, and our ability to support our own or create our own executive function and use our executive function skills to be planful in the learning environment. So when we make this big picture of how learners differ, we begin to see why we need a 7-webinar series to start thinking about how we tackle this learner variability, how our hybrid design of our environment is there to support them. So we want to just ask you, what variability in learners are you paying attention to most right now in your hybrid instruction? Which of these dimensions, which of these ways that learners differ is most resonating with you? Maybe what's been the hardest for you to address, or maybe what have you not focused on that you might want to?
And if you're like most of the teachers we've talked with this year, it might be that the thing that you were focused most on at school is not the same thing that you're focused on right now as you're designing hybrid instruction. For example, we've heard many teachers say, I didn't focus as much on the variability and executive function skills because I was always providing executive function supports in the classroom. Now that learners are having to put some of those in place for themselves, I'm having to really, really pay attention to the variability in my learners in terms of what kinds of executive functions they can employ independently in their own context. So it might be that it's shifted because the context has changed. Lots about emotion coming in through the chat. Yes.
Several people are only sending to panelists, so click that drop down menu again and select all panelists and attendees. And we can see variability in ourselves as educators, right? Susan, everyone's seeing something different or paying attention to something different. And UDL, this definition of variability helps us to think about, how do I do this on the whole? So many great things coming through. Emotional well-being just seems to be topping the board, that effort and resilience, right? And the executive, I love the tie, Anastasia, to the executive function. How do we support them to show the effort and resilience to get through their tasks, to get through a difficult week, back and forth in their learning, and provide them the executive functioning skills and supports that they need to be able to be successful, right, and complete those tasks. Great. So we have so much with this vision of learner variability, just the difference. We can now look at design and say, how well have I designed to do all of these things in that learning environment? So when we think of that hybrid instruction, all of these dimensions of variability impact all the ways that we are designing instruction and all of our touch points with our learners. So you can think about virtual meetings. How are we using that to support that emotional well-being? What's in my digital classroom, my LMS, whether you're using Google Classroom, or maybe you're using a Microsoft project or whatever, Canvas, whatever you might be using. What does that digital presence look like, and how am I supporting that dimension of learner variability? Maybe I'm using phone calls and office hours. Maybe what am I doing in my in-person lessons? And then when I look at my literacy materials, how do all those literacy materials help to support that dimension of variability as well? And I can break them up. I can think about how I use each of these components to support those different dimensions of variability. Or I can say, hey, how do I use each one of these to support each of those dimensions? Where are those tools needed? And as we dive into this series even deeper, we'll begin to identify those strategies that we're using, those high leverage places we can be looking. So what we know, the UDL core concepts that we do want to bring forward, as we know this session is powered by UDL, but UDL is not required, is that learner variability is the norm, that every learner in every context is going to be different, that it's predictable. By looking at that list, we've created a resource bank for us as educators to talk about how are we designing for this, so it's predictable. By being intentional about what we're looking at, we as educators can problem solve together. And it's contextual. We know from hybrid learning to the face-to-face learning to socially distanced learning, every learner is different in those different environments. So how can we plan for those different contexts?
And I can imagine that if I was a teacher today designing for tomorrow, I might look at that list of the ways that learners vary, and I might add something that's very unique to my context, right? So feel free to customize what you're getting from these webinar series to really work for you.
Awesome. So concept number 2 we want to dive into. With that variability in mind, we want to support all learners to be expert learners. Susan, why don't you take us away on this?
All right. Well, I think the shortest route to understanding this concept of expert learning is for me to tell you about my youngest daughter. I have 4 daughters. To tell you about Harriet and her C- in her Spanish class when she was in 9th grade. Harriet's 18 today, but when she was about 14 years old, I got a call from her Spanish teacher who said, you need to come in for a meeting. Harriet's not doing very well in Spanish. And Harriet's the youngest child, and I didn't pay that much attention. She did pretty well in school. So I was surprised by a phone call, and I went in, and like any good working parent, I didn't have a chance to talk with her before the meeting. So I went in and I kind of looked at Harriet during the meeting, and I said, like, what's going on? And she's teacher chimed in and said, she's just not doing the homework. And I looked at Harriet and she looked at me, and I was kind of like, honey, I see you at your desk all the time. We have a little house. Um, and Harriet said, you know, Mom, I want to be an attorney. And you know, Mom, that for me, in order to be an attorney, and I want to work on social justice. And you know, Mom, that in order for me to be an attorney who works on social justice, I have to have two languages. And I don't know if that's a fact, but that is a fact to her. And so I don't just want to get a good grade in Spanish. I really want to learn Spanish. I would be happy to do the homework, but I can't learn that way. It's a website that we go to, it's a digital worksheet that we do every single night, and I just can't learn that way. But I found these videos and I watch these videos, and then I have this system I made up with note cards where I study from the note cards that I make from the videos. And the teacher chimed in again and she said, you know, she does know the material. She's doing really well in all the exams. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Now, if you're a competency-based education person, you're probably thinking, she shouldn't be graded on doing the homework if she's learning the material. But that's another webinar series. What I want to highlight here is that when I was in school, I would have been a very, very good student, right? I would have thought, I'm going to get 6 points for every homework. If I get 6 points for 40 homeworks, that would be this many points, and I can get an A minus if I get a good grade. I would have been calculating how to get a good grade in that course. I would not have been focused on learning the Spanish. Harriet was being maybe not a good student, but being an expert learner. She knew that she was motivated, she knew her goal. She was resourceful and knowledgeable. She's like, I know there are other ways out there. There are other resources I can find to learn this Spanish content. And she was strategic, right? And she was like, I'm going to make a system for myself, and it was an effective system that worked for her to learn the Spanish. So I think that little story just kind of contrasts nicely the difference between good student and expert learning. An expert learner. An expert learner is a learner who is committed to becoming better at learning itself through every learning experience. Expert learners are goal-directed. They set goals. So on the way home from that meeting, Harriet said, you know, this made me realize I need to get better at time management. Like, in other words, she wanted to get back to those homeworks. She meant to go back. I mean, I still learn the Spanish, but I didn't save enough time to do the other work. I also need to get more sleep. And you know, this story happened before the pandemic, but wow, I'm hearing so much more about wellness and supporting learners to kind of include their own wellness in their sort of suite of expert learning skills. So I think that's an important piece too. So expert learners set goals, and we're going to invite you to do a little exploration now into that.
So one of the resources we have for you is a graphic organizer that'll take us through this 7-part series. We'll start to build some strategies, build some descriptions of what expert literacy learners look like. But first, we want to start with this general concept of expert learning. So Jennifer's going to put this document into the chat. You can also access it from the home base, from the resource document. And we want you to think about, how has the hybrid environment required your learners to be expert learners? You'll have an image you'll have the graphic organizer up that you can look through, and I'll also post the descriptions on a slide. But our learning environment has drastically changed, and we now require our students to be expert learners in a way that they never had to independently. We were always there to prompt, to guide, to help them process, to give probing questions and break down larger tasks. But now, in this new environment, our learners have to be expert learners. So feel free to dive in, take a look at those descriptors, and think about how your environment has required your learners to do that. This is the same information that you have on your graphic organizer. So feel free to start jotting down notes, to make some circles, to think about, how are we supporting our learners to do this in the various aspects of our hybrid environment. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to take a look at that and make some reflections.
And I encourage you to take time to really do this now because we're going to be returning to it later this afternoon. And I think you'll find it useful for your own learning if you spend some time reflecting in the document right now. And then when you return, to kind of have your own ability to monitor your own progress of understanding. If you're having trouble accessing anything, just put a question in the chat. Our colleague Jennifer Levine is there, and she is happy to help you sort things out, find links, fix things that we messed up. It looks like we might have made an access mistake. So just let her know. And thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, hopefully that was time enough for you to get lost in the document. First, tell us, before we reflect on the content, how did you interact with that? What did you do? Did you start to highlight and note one thing? Did you read them all and then go back and check off a few that you were really interested in? Did you get past page one? Let us know your strategies. What did you do as you were reading through that document? Nancy saying I started with engagement because that seems like the foundation for everything. Awesome. Great. Thank you for noticing that word, Nancy. That when we want to build engagement, we can use those descriptors. Match the headings from the slides to the document headings. Great. Read through the entire doc before attempting anything. Yeah, great. So many great strategies coming in. And we want to do that with our learners. Make sure we're doing that in our hybrid instruction, is that we're really thinking about those strategies that we use to break down text, that we use to break down charts, graphs, and information. Focusing on that strategies before content can really help learners to build that independence and agency with difficult text. I love that, Julie. I scanned through to find one that spoke to me, and that got me going. Awesome. Great. There's variability. There's differences in how we would interact with this. So, Julie, we'd love to hear more about those. What are the things that got you going? How has the hybrid environment required your learners to be expert learners? Go ahead and share about that content. What was really resonating from that content with you? Might be something that you do really well and your hybrid environment is designed to support, or maybe something that you want to work on. Is there specific language from that graphic that's jumping out to you?
We've heard from so many teachers that some of these things on this list are things that the teacher has done in the school, right? Like I usually do that for learners. I'm usually there to support them to keep going when the going gets tough. I'm usually there to suggest, is that strategy working right now? Is there a better way, another way you might want to approach that math problem? And now learners are having to take on some of the responsibility for some of these sort of ways of being in the learning experience. And so we're having to think more intentionally about designing for learners to be able to be like this, and counting less on ourselves to kind of be there to hold them up in all of those ways. So, yes.
Yeah, Julie's thinking a lot about that prior knowledge. Great, Julie. And that's definitely the priority in our next session on accessibility. That's great. We want to connect and activate that new and prior knowledge. Abandoned plan, Jason, you've picked out one of my favorites. Abandoned plans and strategies that are ineffective, right? How do we reflect with our learners so they can say, actually, you know what I did last week in that hybrid environment, that's not working for me. I need to change that. Where's the time in that conversation? So in that hybrid slide, is that, in your phone calls, your one-on-one office hours? Are we taking time to reflect on that? In your digital classroom, is there an assignment that's getting them to reflect on the process of learning throughout the week and what they might do or change? And formulating a plan is so important. Thank you, Stacy. That our learners right now have to, from Monday to Friday, formulate plans for learning, how they're going to navigate this hybrid environment with all the distractions that come within it, with all the changes in context, whether they're at school and then home, and in between both. How they're going to monitor their progress. Great. So we can think, and all the strategies that we choose, how we look at the design of our environment might change based upon which of the descriptors we're really thinking about supporting or we want to focus on. So we're going to dive in to the definition of literacy. As we are here, that was some background knowledge to get us going. What is learner variability? What are all the dimensions we want to support? How can we use expert learning as our leverage to change to create these literacy learners? So literacy is, and this definition comes from UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. This definition is also, there's some resources in here around this definition from the National Teachers of English, and you can definitely, a National Council on the Teachers of English, and you can definitely check that out in the resource document. But what we want to focus on here, literacy is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute using printed and written materials associated with varying contexts. And we know that varying context is so alive right now. Literacy involves a continuum of learning in enabling individuals to achieve their goals, to develop their knowledge and potential, and to participate fully in their community and wider society. So such a rich definition of literacy beyond just reading and writing skills. And as we get into this first webinar and set up our series, I always love to go to the why. What's the why of literacy? And I think that second description really, paragraph really points that out. And that words achieve their goals, that the goal of literacy is to help them to achieve their own individual potential, their own goals, and to fully participate in the community. So when we frame literacy around this purpose, we can then begin to say, how does our hybrid environment support learners to do that? So we're going to focus today on one aspect that's right in that definition, and that is creating goal-directed learners. So when we are thinking about expert readers and writers, we're thinking about goal-directed learners. You can see that those descriptors right in those learner characteristics, right under purposeful and motivated. We had some people say, I focus right on engagement because I really want to make sure I am supporting that. So how are our learners goal-directed in their learning, and how do they know how to set challenging learning goals for themselves? This idea of learner goal setting and setting challenging goals can really be one of our answers to engagement in the hybrid environment. We know it's so hard to support students with distractions that come within the changing environment. So how do we support that motivation? How do we help to make students purposeful? We're going to take a deeper dive into this goal-directed learning aspects. Students, Susan, do you want to lead this conversation?
Yes, before I do, I want to add that there's one other resource in the resource sheet, and it's a link to the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies out of the University of North Carolina School of Medicine. And if you are like me, working in the field of special education, or that's what I used to do, you may know that for some learners, literacy was not even part of the curriculum, right? It was sort of like, we're going to just work on functional skills, and she doesn't really need how to learn how to read and write. We're really talking about all learners, and the work in North Carolina is just fantastic, and I think you'll find great resources there. So I think, Neil, for the sake of time, we might want to skip this and move forward because it's getting a little bit late.
All right, excellent. So we know we are trying to create goal-directed learners. And what are some of the descriptors of what they look like when they're goal-directed? And we can think about how the design of our environment helps learners to do this. So expert readers and writers are goal-directed when they set daily and weekly goals for their literacy learning, when they personalize goals based on their interest and self-assessment, when they've said, what did I do really well in that last assignment? What do I want to improve on? How do I want to get better as a reader or writer? And they want to reflect on their goals, and they set a new goal. From that point, when they say, oh yeah, I've reached that, or I've demonstrated this skill, and this is what I want to do next. This is a process we want to support with our students. And Stacy adds to the chat, I know they're goal directed when they ask me questions about an assignment well before the due date, right? They recognize that's probably a sign of engagement, Stacy, that they want to get really involved in that. And you've caught their attention with what the assignment looks like.
Neil, before you change the slide, I just want to just sort of highlight something that I think that when I learned how to be a teacher, I thought, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to cross my fingers, and I'm going to hope so much that learners come out goal-directed, and that they start to set daily and weekly goals, and they start to reflect on their progress, and they start to set new goals. Starting with what we want to see in learners, right? What are learners doing and saying? Having that vision for what expert literacy learners looks like is a better starting point than thinking about what I'm going to do. I want to think about what learners are going to do and then ask myself, how do I design for that? So this series is really going to be about how do we design to get this stuff in learners.
And Deborah, you nailed it. It comes back to what do we do as educators that set up this learning process. One of the things I want to point out in our resource document, there are going to be 2 videos. When you look down to week 1 or webinar 1, you'll get some resources that are going to help you to think about this. And there's 2 videos. There's a grade 1 elementary writing video and a middle school video on public speaking. And in each of those, it models a process for helping learners to set goals. It gives you a model to look for, to say, how might I incorporate that into my practice? So definitely take a look at that. If setting daily and weekly goals is part of your practice, keep it up. It's a really great practice to get into those engagement pieces where students can own and personalize learning. So if you want to take a look at those videos are there for you as a self-guided resource at the end of the session. And then beyond that, we want learners to seek feedback. So expert readers and writers collaborate and they communicate. So they seek feedback on their learning goals. Oftentimes as an educator, I know I gave feedback, but I never had a student seek feedback. So coach your learners on how to ask good feedback questions, how to be direct in what they're looking for you, so that we don't get the moment where they just push turn in and wait for all of the comments to come back, that they turn in their work with a question to you that says, I'm wondering how clear my thesis is, or I'm wondering if the 3 paragraphs that I put into this writing are able to support my are good evidence for supporting my thesis. Maybe they come up with their own question, and then we can respond to that, and that engages them deeply in their own personal goal setting and reflection. We have them share their goals with families to encourage transfer, so that this literacy learning can happen at the dinner table. I love my favorite strategy at the dinner table or in conversation with one of my children as they're passing by is I tell them about my day and I ask them for a 1-word summary. What's the 1 word that would summarize how my day has gone today? And they can give that back to me, and then we can have a discussion about why they chose that word. So how do we help to share help our learners share goals with their families to encourage transfer? And then we can co-design ways to reach their goal through their schoolwork and that home environment. How are we using those face-to-face conversations to get them to connect this literacy learning to that home environment? So when you think about your hybrid instruction, we have all of these avenues to think about how we're creating goal-directed learners. The virtual meeting, the digital classroom, what's listed in your LMS, the phone calls and office hours, your in-person lessons, and in those embedded in the literacy materials, we can think about how we're supporting goal-directed learners. And we had someone mention it. There are a whole bunch of strategies we need to think about in the design. What can we put in our design so that out will come, as Susan said, by design, goal-directed learners. So I'll pause over these strategies for just a minute, allow you to pause and reflect on that idea of goal-directed learners and think about some of these strategies in your practice. So giving you just a second to process, you can think about, again, in your digital environment, your LMS or that face-to-face teaching, reflecting on your phone calls with students. How are you sharing, posting, revisiting, and reflecting on those literacy goals throughout learning? We want to keep our goals flexible because literacy instruction, literacy learning, and the demonstration of our literacy skills can look so different amongst all our learners. So keep those goals flexible. Avoid including the means, how we have to reach the goal, so learners can find ways to connect that engage them. Provide choice to reach the goal, because that encourages risk-taking. If there's many ways to reach the goal and students understand that success can have different forms, then that's the ingredients for risk-taking in our literacy environments. Provide those observable success criteria. Does your digital classroom show exactly, is there a checklist that says how to reach the goal and what success looks like on each of those assignments? Support your learners to personalize their goals. So if the goal is to write this essay, what do they want to focus on about becoming a better reader or writer in that environment? Help them personalize those goals. Again, take a look at some of those videos that we have in our resource document, can be a good model for you. Model achievement of the goals. What would it look like and sound like if you were able to reach that goal? Help them to articulate their own behaviors that they should see upon achieving success. And then provide feedback respective to each of those learners' goals. Our feedback should be directed at what they want to hear. So as they own their own learning and they reach out and risk take to ask for our feedback, how can we provide feedback respective to each of those learners' goals? Yeah, and Valerie saying that, yeah, thank you, Valerie. I wonder how you might help students choose. I love it. When you choose, that means maybe you've given them a word bank of goals, right? Whether it is in a with younger children or even in a high school environment, if you're not used to setting your own goals in a learning environment, that's going to need to be a scaffolded process. So you might model goals. You might do a shared writing or a shared reading, and you might put up some goals that you would think that the learners might want to attain. So think about your learners. What are 4 or 5 goals you would want them striving for? Practice that in your shared writing, shared reading, and then get them eventually to be able to personalize those goals. You can use, instead of a word bank, a goal bank, 4 or 5 goals on an anchor chart or on your, on a slide that would help to articulate the types of things you would want them working on and let them choose those goals. If we get some work in choosing from a selected list of goals, we can then begin to internalize that process and set the next goals for ourselves. Thanks, Valerie.
And I noticed, Valerie, that your question had a little talked about a student who is nonverbal. So I just want to say that we have a little video coming up to close today that is produced by a student who uses augmentative communication. So perhaps there'll be something in there that's helpful.
So this document will support you as we go throughout. We focus on that second one, that goal-directed learners. So as we watch this video, start to create your plan. What might you want to do as your first steps to supporting goal-directed learners? And when we think about expert learners, we have a great model here of Grant, who's going to take us out for the rest of our session.
One of the things I love about what Grant says, and you're going to see a clip of Grant giving a talk at the Autism Conference in New Hampshire last year. He was co-presenting with Michael McSheehan, so you'll hear him reference Michael's name at one point. I don't know any student who has done a better job at articulating the relationship between emotion and design, and what happens when we don't proactively design for the learner variability of learners in our classroom and the emotional impact of us maybe not taking that time to design, maybe not even intentionally not taking that time, maybe just not thinking, that not knowing or seeing what needed to be designed. So he does a really nice job at reminding us, and I feel like it's especially nice right now as we're all, I mean, your first chats in the beginning of this webinar were about paying attention to that emotional well-being of learners. So I think you'll find this useful.
So as I explained, I've had the opportunity to speak at conferences many times about my school-based inclusion experience, my thoughts on communication rights, and my work toward typing independence. I am grateful every time people entrust me with responsibility to deliver a message to an audience. So, when I was asked to suggest a keynote topic, I thought my hopes for this are little beyond what I have talked about before. But before I dive into that, let me share a little about my experience. As I said, I am 17 now. I started typing at 9 after a long history of lots of typical autism interventions, which was technically the end of 3rd grade for me. I went to my public school in 4th grade only to be put in a segregated autism classroom, and then, with a lot of advocacy from my parents and a few professionals, I have been included in general education classes since 5th grade. Since then, I have been included in general education classes with a 1-1 educator to support my communication needs for 5th through my present 11th grade. I know that this fact alone makes me one very lucky kid. So, over the years, I have shared how we went through the process of getting support in my schools. My journey included a major move across the country in 2017, so I should also explain that we've had to win over staff at one public elementary school and middle school in Maryland, and then
Neil, we lost the audio.
I had been included in Maryland with a 1-1 and accommodations, and they were pretty much on board from the beginning to include me there too. I think it helped that I was able to type without direct support by then, but still, no pushback. This was great luck for me. I think the timing was fortunate, because my new district in Washington state was already taking steps to become a SWIFT school, so when I walked through the doors, I think they saw it as an opportunity to support a more complicated student in inclusion. In a nutshell, this is what I want to share. You see, I had mind share and support from the very beginning, and I have highly motivated professionals all around me who want to see me included, but the process of doing it has still been bumpy and lonely. It's still a learning process that I never realized could be this hard. That's what I want to share. That inclusion is about so much more than just a desire to include students. I'm fortunate to travel to conferences and spend time with professionals, so I am aware of what typical supports and strategies are used to include kids like me. What I did not realize was how much work needs to happen all over a system in order for a kid like me to walk into a classroom and feel successful every day. We have all heard what accommodations to ask for. The typical accommodations are listed on an IEP, and being eligible for them means that a school needs to provide them. My typical accommodations are things like access to digital print materials, a human reader, a scribe, extra time to complete assignments, and sensory breaks. However, having accommodations means that you are one student among many students with different requirements. I spend a lot of time thinking about how things can be better for students like me, but I also notice kids all around me who could use some of the accommodations I get. Years ago, I started learning about universal design for learning, and I am convinced that if schools were more focused on UDL, more kids like me could be included. I am going to let Michael explain all the technical details, but I'll share this. Really, almost every accommodation I need can be found in classrooms with great accessibility. So much of my daily stress comes from trying to jump through hoops every day to gain access. Even if there is a person assigned to help me, no one person can do it all. As schools have given us more access to technology, more sources of information for learning are present. My experience is that so many students who type are trying to gain access to classes by getting their communication recognized as valid. Once you gain access though, there is much that can be done to make the next part of the journey less stressful. Give the kids a break. So what do I mean by that? Prepare for a student to be in your class. Accommodations are necessary sometimes, but I think we should be planning for more variability of students in classrooms from the beginning. I am welcomed into classes, but that does not mean they were designed for me, or that a teacher is ready for me. Here's what might happen. A lesson might have objectives, activities, and assignments that never consider how I will do any of that work. The materials may not be digital, so that means I might not be able to increase the size, or use my text-to-speech accommodation. The worksheets may be on paper, or a scanned picture of a document, which means that someone will need to create the document especially for me. The activity may call for a small group discussion over just a couple of minutes. I am supposed to get questions ahead, but that doesn't happen every day, so I do the best I can. But it is stressful. In universal design, so many of these stressors would be removed. That's what I want to make sure I talk about. Powers who support students who type can move mountains, but the work should be distributed. When teachers don't really know all the ways I am running into barriers, then they can't improve at including more kids like me. My heart breaks when I walk into a class and realize nobody thought about how I would participate ahead of time, and when I am sad, I have a much harder time staying calm and attentive. The power with me will now have to scramble, and everyone sees all the effort, so I won't look competent to many people today. Yesterday's presentation by Dr. Lorenz and Dr. Fee resonated so much with me. I have been studying about the effects of stress on brains for the last couple years, and I need to say that my whole day is often managing my reactions to things like accessibility issues. I try to shake it off, but every occurrence of similar scenarios from other days flashes through my mind, and I struggle to keep my focus. Okay, then there's always the chance that a well-meaning teacher realizes I am not dysregulated, and thinks I totally don't need to do this activity after all, and excuses me from work. In some cases, this is fine because I can show my value in other ways, but teachers should know that this does not feel inclusive to me, and it's embarrassing and demotivating, and it makes me wonder why I ever got out of bed that morning. So, let me start to share my vision. Let's get better at UDL. Today we will go over a lot to think about, and I hope it leads to a great discussion.
I know lots of us had to go with the time, but thanks for those of you who stayed. And we did link this video in the resource document, or if it's not there, we'll make sure it is there so that you'll have access to it. Neil, are there any, do you have your slides?
Yep, I'm getting there. Sorry about that.
One of the slides that we're going to put up right now says, do you have any thoughts, questions, anything you want to throw in the chat?
Yeah, so if you just want to share your next steps, of course, we asked you to support learners to be goal directed. So based upon our discussions today, what's a goal for you? What can you take forward? What would be your next step? Whether it's learner variability that resonated for you, whether you like thinking about that expert learner, literacy learner, and being goal directed. What might you do as your first next step? So feel free to share that on your way out, and thank you for being here today.
And Jennifer has been posting a link to a feedback form in the chat, and we absolutely would love your feedback. So please know that we will take it seriously. And thanks for taking the time.
And our next session is going to be on accessibility in hybrid literacy. So please come on back and we'll think about how we can support prior knowledge and use some of the resources that the National Center for the Accessible Educational Materials has for us to think about accessibility.
And Jennifer, people are asking in the chat about signing up for the next series, the next session, webinar. I don't know the answer, so I think that the answer is that we will send out an invite as soon as possible. Okay, that's the answer. So thanks everybody for being here. We'll stick around if you have any questions. Feel free to throw them in the chat. Otherwise, you have our emails. I'll put those back in the chat again. You're welcome to reach out anytime. Thank you for being here. Stay safe and well, and we look forward to seeing you in January.
Thanks all.